Hi everyone, my capstone presentation was on approaching behaviors in the classroom. So, since the pandemic, there has been a significant decrease in students' socio-emotional and behavioral development. There's been an increase in class disruptions, disrespectful behavior, and rowdiness in the classroom, which has led to a higher level of teachers leaving the profession and teacher burnout. So, with this, a lot of times educators mislabel student behavior and emotion because of a lack of knowledge of where those are stemming from. So I believe that there is a need for professional development on educating teachers about where their students' behaviors are stemming from, why they're happening, and how they can better support their students. So the objective of this study was to analyze the relationship between current student behaviors and supports that were currently being implemented, as well as the educators' willingness to learn new strategies that will better support their students, and to be able to learn about the current social and emotional learning structures that were in place in their classrooms and how they were currently supporting their students. So the literature that I found kind of broke up into three different themes. The first one was the effects of adverse childhood experiences on student development. So the amount of adverse childhood experiences that a student has determines the amount of stress that they take with them to school every day, which further transpires into their reactions and behaviors that they have. The second was the impact of stress on the brain. So this section really looked at how the brain works and how the working memory is affected when the amygdala and the hippocampus are triggered. And then the third one is current deficits as a result of trauma. So what these students are currently struggling with as a result of coming to school with these stressors. And that was the ability to regulate emotions as well as having a lack of executive functioning skills. So the methodology of this study was set up through a qualitative research study that was done through interviews. So the school that I conducted this study at was in southern Maine, and it was suburban, and 0.45% of the students had behavioral struggles. I specifically looked at 4 individuals for the interviews, 2 of which were second grade teachers and 2 who were third grade teachers. They all had a different level of teaching experience, which I thought was interesting because that definitely had something to do with their responses to certain questions. And then over here on the right, there are the 8 questions that I asked. 4 and 5 both have a second part. So if you would like to read through those, you are more than welcome to pause the video. So these are the results that I found from the interviews. I really enjoyed setting it up this way because I was able to compare a lot of the responses as well as current themes throughout each of the teachers' experiences and kind of looking at them from multiple perspectives. So the trends in these results that I found were I compared 2 of the different teachers' responses. So teachers A and D shared some similarities. These teachers both had different levels of experience as well as they both taught different grades. So the similarities were that the students both had impulse control and shouting out, and the teachers were currently finding success with integrating structured peer support, but these teachers did have a different stance on their willingness to learn new strategies to support their students. For teachers B and C, their students both struggled with following oral directions, but they were currently using similar strategies that worked around giving students breaks when they're trying to regulate their emotions. And similarly to the teachers above, they both had a different stance on their willingness to implement new interventions for these students. So the overall result was that I found that teachers who were more willing to support their students and learn new strategies had a different kind of way of responding to the questions that were asked. Those who were more willing were more positive and more open-minded about how their students' behaviors were and how they could further support them, whereas the teachers who were less willing to learn new strategies were kind of rigid and had concrete ideas about their students and were not as open-minded and open to learning new strategies to support their students. And I think that had something to do with the experience, levels of experience that the teachers had. Those who were more veteran teachers tended to be less willing to learn new strategies. So the proposed interventions that I found were centered around these three things. So the first one was strengthening emotional regulation skills. So this can be done through having meaningful conversations about emotions, how to process how students are feeling, and what those feelings mean for them. This can be done through restorative justice circles, daily check-ins, and something like Rosebud and Thorn. The second one is strengthening executive functioning skills. So this can be through working on students with time management, planning, organizing, which are all things that help to strengthen the working memory. Some strategies to do this are implementing content-specific study skills, implementing to-do lists, and building metacognition. The third one was a CogMed working memory training. This was a specific training that would need to be implemented into the schools. It's a computerized game that helps to train the working memory, and it focuses on building critical thinking and executive functioning skills. And it has been shown that after 3 months of consistent use, children have improved their performance and their working memory. The difficulties with implementing these interventions was that it's hard to find time to connect one-on-one with students sometimes, but those individual check-ins are key. These interventions need to be consistent for the students, so it's not something that you can just try for 1 week and then, assume that they're going to be okay. It needs to be consistent, and it needs to have some authenticity to it. And then the CogMed working training, that is something that has to be developed by the school and is something that is really hard to implement into just one single classroom. So this would have to take place in a different type of setting, like counseling or school psychologist or behavioral specialist in the school or something like that. So the conclusions that I found was that pretty much you need to be willing as an educator to learn new strategies to support your students. You have to trust the facts and avoid doubting your students' intentions for their behaviors. But by doing this, you'll be able to gain and strengthen these students' cognitive and emotional regulation skills, which will overall create a positive classroom environment for all members, and students will be able to create a more trusting and meaningful relationship with you. And then these are my references. Thank you all for listening.